Alright, so this is gonna be a guide to card speed and turn speed in Legends of Runeterra. So we're gonna start off with the first three basic card speeds that is introduced to the game. There's burst, fast, and slow. So the higher you are on the speed chart means that the cards below your speed cannot react to your card. So for example, burst spells in the game cannot be reacted by anything. If you play a burst spell, your opponent just gotta watch you play the burst spell. So yeah, that's pretty much the basics. So now we're gonna talk about burst spells. Burst spells are OP. Burst spells are pretty nice. We're gonna go through Progressive Day. Progressive Day, let's say, is our standard sample burst spell. So when I play Progressive Day, my opponent cannot react to Progressive Day. If I play Progressive Day, he cannot deny it, which is really good because 8 mana for 3 mana is kind of a big yikes. Next thing is that when you play a burst spell, your turn does not end. So you can always chain it into another card. So if I play Progressive Day and I draw a monster, I could play the monster. If I play Progressive Day and I get another burst spell, I could play the other burst spell and then play another card after that. So you can always chain loop burst spells on one turn as long as you have enough mana. And that's pretty much it about burst spells. Next up, we have fast spells. Fast spells generally include removal and kind of denying your opponent's card. A good example is the card Deny, where you just negate the effect of a monster. Fast spells can react to other fast spells. Fast spells can react to slow spells. And yeah, I think that's also the basic of fast spells. Next up, we have slow spells. Slow spell is the slowest card speed in the game. When you play a slow spell, it has to be your turn. I'll go in depth about that later on to the video because there's also something called turn speed. So based on what action you do on a certain turn, you can't play certain cards. So spells have speed in this game, and normal cards like such as monsters, also have speed. The game really doesn't tell you about this, so I'm gonna explain it a little bit. So when you play a monster, it's called a slow turn because when you play a monster, you pretty much have to pass the turn over to your opponent, meaning that you probably might get punished by their spells or whatever, or they might summon a monster in response of your summon. Summoning monsters also could trigger effects. So if your monster has a play effect, such as kill a unit, you could kill your unit when you summon the monster. This is a burst speed, so your opponent can't do anything but watch your monsters die and watch the effect trigger. On the other hand, if you play a monster that generally targets your opponent, it would trigger as a slow speed because that's how the game works. And sometimes when you hover over the spell, you can see that's a slow spell. So yeah. Alright, next up we have turn speed. It's a little bit finicky. It's kind of hard to understand and explain. So I'm going to start off by talking about how turn works. So everyone has a turn. The person that has the attack token attacks first. That means they also has their turn first. So the person with the attack token can decide what to do, what kind of spell to play monsters, attack, whatever. But based on what the first player does, kind of decides what the opponent has to do, because after the first player plays something, the second player has a respawn turn. On the respawn turn, you can only play cards with the same speed or faster speed than what your opponent played. An example of this is when your opponent plays a fast spell. So when my opponent plays a fast spell, I can't play any slow spells or summon a monster on that response turn because it's not faster than that fast spell. So that means if he plays a fast spell, I have to tank the fast spell and just pass my response turn over. So let's say that you pass the response turn. By passing the response turn, meaning that you tank whatever your opponent is gonna play. This also means that you could punish your opponent. So if you pass the response turn, it becomes your turn, meaning that you have the ability to control whatever the turn speed goes. Also meaning that you could punish them with a very big slow spell. But let's say you don't pass the response turn and you play something in response of what your opponent plays, like another fast spell. This allows your opponent to get a response turn, in which he could play a card in response of the card that you just played. And after he plays that, you get the response turn back. And yeah, pretty much it could go on a cycle as long as you have enough mana and spells to play to counter each other's spells. But generally, after the entire cycle or chain of spells are played, you get your turn back, and now you have the turn to do whatever the hell you want. So why is the response turn important? By understanding your response turn, you could improve your gameplay significantly. You could learn how to bait out spells, prevent yourself from getting demolished in one turn, punish your opponent really hard. There's a lot of stuff going around response turn, so yeah, use your turn very wisely. When you attack, it's pretty much a burst. Your opponent cannot play anything in response to your attack. The only thing he can respond to is by defending, which is also a burst speed. So, when I'm attacking with, let's say, 3 monsters, and your opponent only has like 1 monster, your opponent, if I could attack that turn, your opponent cannot respond to all my monsters. He can only defend 1 monsters. But he could also play spells in response of the attacking monsters, but he can't play spells in order to stop me from dropping my monsters onto the board. So pretty much, if you drop your monsters onto the board, your opponent pretty much is locked out from slow spells. Your opponent cannot play a single slow spell in their hand, which is why attacking on your starting turn is very good, because it's very less likely that you're going to get punished by your opponent's spells, probably their big slow spells. But this could also lead your opponent to play combat spells. So generally, it's really up to you to decide whether you want to attack or maybe possibly get punished for what you do. So depending on your deck, let's say I'm playing an aggro deck, I generally want to attack on my turns. And generally later on into the game, you should attack before you get punished by a big spell, because later on the game means more manas and more opportunities for you to get hit by some random stuff. So yeah, eventually the decision making is up to you, and really up to you to decide whether or not you're going to get punished or you're not going to get punished. Next up, we have defense. Defending is also the same concept. If I place a monster down to defend, your opponent cannot do anything to stop you from putting that monster onto the board. Since I said that attack and defend is a burst turn, you could play burst cards on that turn in order to help you defend. So let's say I only have 1 monster to defend against his 3. I could play a burst spell such as Summon Scuttlecrab. Summon Scuttlecrab is a burst spell, so it allows me to summon a 1/1. If I play this burst spell, I could have an extra monster to defend against his monsters, which is really, really nice. So if you don't have monsters to defend against attacking monsters, you could play a burst spell and defend against the monsters that are attacking, which is pretty nice if you don't have any monsters on your board. So next up, we have something I call the prepping turn. The person that's attacking pretty much have that turn first. That person decides what is gonna happen. So the person that's attacking has a decision to either attack you, summon a monster, or play a spell. So let's say he attacks you. If he attacks you, that's a burst turn. So pretty much you really can't do much other than throw down your monsters and play spells to block it. Next up, we have summoning a monster. Summoning a monster is a slow turn. So when you summon a monster, you pass the turn to your opponent. So he has a chance to respond to your summon or by summoning another monster, or he could play a slow spell to punish you because you didn't attack him. Generally, if you're pushing for elite though, you shouldn't go summon monsters. You should pretty much just swing and just throw everything that you have onto the board. Next up, we have playing a spell. By playing a spell, you could decide what kind of turn you want to really play out. If you play a burst spell, it's whatever goes. If you play a fast spell, your opponent gets the response turn, which I explained before the video. Next up, we have the slow turn. In this turn, you could play a monster and give the turn to your opponent, where he could play a monster and do whatever hell he wants. Or you could play a slow spell, which is generally not recommended. Why would you not play a slow spell when you have the turn first? First thing first, slow spells generally are like a very big AoE or going for a very big push. If let's say your slow spell is a very big AoE. If it's a very big AoE, this means that when you play it, it probably costs a hefty amount of mana. Which also means that if the AoE does go through, your opponent has a lot of mana, meaning that he could still play a lot of more cards. It really depends on what the matchup is and what your opponent really is playing. If your opponent is playing Control Shadow Isles, you know he's going to have that 9 mana of remove your entire board. So, if you have the attack token, don't play your slow spells. on the first turn. You should generally save it when you could punish. So it's generally after your opponent summons some monsters, and you could probably go for a bigger punish. It really depends. If you're if you're insecure about some plays, you could definitely do it. It really depends on the matchup. Really depends on the deck. So. But the rule of thumb is generally don't play your slow spells on the very start of your turn. And yeah, that's pretty much about it about the spells and turns in the game. This is a pretty basic rundown. If you guys enjoy, remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. This is generally the very basics. This is the rundown of the spells, the cards, and the turn speed in this game. If you pretty much understand what is going on, your gameplay is definitely going to improve. Punishing is very important, and yeah, if you can understand the turn speed and the card speed, you could definitely go for bigger punishes and, debate your opponents, doing some stuff, playing mind games. Pretty much, that's about it. Hope you guys enjoy all of this content, and as always, I'll catch you guys all later. Peace.